we're just going to take part in our key theme analysis, which is something that we're doing every week, which is kind of outlined in that curriculum that you've been sent through from the SCITT. So this week we've been looking at behaviour management, and I know we've been thinking about that quite deeply recently, especially as we're getting to know the class and establishing ourselves as a teacher. So we had a few articles that we've had to look at and explore from Impact. There were some Impact articles that were outlined on the curriculum overview. So in the first one, what did you see as the key points there in that article?
Well, I kind of thought that managing behaviour is really a key entry point to your teaching, and actually it's the foundational element of everything. So it kind of, if you have a good behaviour management, solid behaviour management, then you're able to increase your kind of depth of teaching and hit the ground running, really. I think it's also important to establish a productive classroom environment that also supports positive learning behaviours. And it's important that the early years of teaching to begin establishing routines, practicing behaviour habits, and seeking advice from colleagues and experienced teachers, TAs, to support me with this.
Yeah, looking at those kind of expert models and who we can go to learn from is definitely something that we might think about as some guided actions a little bit later on.
Absolutely. I think also it really kind of allows you to kind of develop those relationships that are deeply rooted in mutual respect and the kind of power of positive praise, and not just saying being really careful with your words as well. So instead of saying well done all the time, maybe saying thank you, because that can kind of maybe give inadvertently lower your expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've summarised the points kind of highlighted within that article well. So it definitely did talk about those relationships being key to establishing a safe environment where pupils can learn. And that's something I certainly took from that article as well. What do you think then that this might look like in the classroom from this first article?
So I think, first of all, greeting pupils at the door and then making sure that you kind of giving them that personalised individual greeting as they are coming into the classroom kind of supports that transition from break times, from home time, and gives them that kind of warm and welcoming kind of approach, climate to learning. And it also helps you to establish your behaviour expectations straight away. So for example, like letting children in 5 at a time, so that then you can pause the line and just double check to see how many children are doing their do now or whatever.
And interestingly, in the second article that we were guided to look at, it talked straight away, actually, as the recommendation. First one was about being at the door to meet and greet, which I know that's something that you've been really working on and embedding.
Yeah, and I think also it's helped me to kind of think about how I navigate my route around my way around the room. Like, for example, am I following the same path? Am I making sure that I'm able to see every child, and how I'd kind of along the way addressing low level behaviour as well.
Yeah, which kind of in that article was one of the recommendations as well that they'd put forward, which was thinking about how you're going to move through the room and start thinking about how with that you'd address any low level disruption if that arises. But like you've already talked about, that positive framing, that thank you is a really essential element. What about if you were having to use the school's behaviour policy? What do you think that you would do there?
I think I'd make sure that I followed it really consistently, and really make sure that I know it well, because it's all well and good somebody passing you a behaviour policy, but if you don't really read it and properly digest it, then when it comes to an incident and you're like, oh no, what have I got to do? Then you can, straight away that you're doing the right thing and that you're not going to have any repercussions from that.
Yeah, and also it's nice to be seen as being fair
absolutely.
and just with the children. There are a few other aspects that came out of that article, weren't there? That second one that we looked at, one being about not speaking over the teacher. What were your thoughts about that?
Well, I think that was something I really struggled with before, because you'd have certain children that would speak over you, and you kind of without addressing that in the moment, then you're kind of letting them sort of like it. You're in the article. It did say something about the you're letting the other children who wouldn't necessarily speak up think that their voice isn't heard. So it is something that I've that from reading the articles made me really stop and think about that, and those voices that aren't often heard, and made me actually read a bit more into that kind of a cold call approach.
Okay, yeah, lovely. And actually, when we look at your DLD a little bit later on, I know that that stop signal is something that you're working on.
Yeah.
So I guess the article actually has come at quite a good time, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Were there any other aspects of the article that stood out to you?
I think the part where it said about the routines and how valuable they are and how much of an impact they have in your classroom, because I want pupils to feel like they're secure and that they're seen as being important in the classroom, and I want children to know what's going to happen at every kind of part of the day, and you know, it's hard and effortful at the beginning. However, like, it's the more effort you put in at the beginning, the easier it is moving forward.
Yeah. Well, it sounds to me like you've taken away from that article the same as I have. I actually really enjoyed refreshing and going back over behaviour. It certainly made me stop and think about my practice as well. And especially now when we look at the DLD and we think about your learning intention, which is to think about that stop signal. I know that there's some aspects from that key theme analysis that we can pull from that and go back to help us.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, well, thank you for taking the time. That's made my job easy when you do the reading, and I look forward to seeing some of this in the classroom shortly. Lesson. That was lovely to see, and especially how we've been working on this and thinking a lot about behaviour recently, and that key theme analysis that we did as well, thinking about those articles and what strategies and what it actually makes us think about in terms of behaviour. So it was really good to see that you'd been implementing some things that you've read as well. So our learning intention for this session was to use effective signals to gain the attention of the pupils. And this was a retrieval session, so you're looking back at the Year 4 content on electricity before you move forward into your Year 6 learning. So linking to your current learning intention then, I noticed, I think it was at 11:43 actually, that you used a bell to signal and gain attention of the class. And you did this again actually at 11:50 as well. So how has this strategy had a positive impact on pupil learning?
Well, before I was kind of just using any old approach that came to mind, and it was when you kind of modelled it to me that I realised that actually there's ways in which I can kind of protect my voice a bit more, and actually the bell is proving to be really, really powerful. And the children know that as soon as I hit the bell and go 3, 2, 1, they have to be ready to learn. And actually it's just made the whole thing a little bit more seamless, and consequently has led to more learning.
Yeah, good, thank you. I noticed then that at 11:47, this was the part where you had done your teacher demonstration with the static electricity with the balloon, and and one of them had said, "Oh, this is magic," and you'd explained actually it's not magic and why it wasn't magic. And then I did notice at that point that some of the children, you'd ask them to go back to their tables and transition over to their tables, and to go and talk with their partner about what they had seen, and he'd made that bit really clear, but some of the children didn't quite meet your expectation of how to transition back to the activities. So you called them back to do it again, and they still didn't do it in silence, so you called them back again. So thinking back to that moment in the lesson, what signal might have been effective here in gaining the attention of the pupils, in that first instance, because they didn't transition back as you'd wanted them?
I think if I'd been a bit more kind of like just expected them to walk back in silence without probably really explaining what my expectations were, and then it wasn't until the second or third time that I sent them off that they actually did it, when I'd kind of broken it down a bit more. But still, I think I could be a bit more, I suppose, going back to that article, making sure that I've got established routines, so I could have a kind of a bit more of an established way of doing it, and actually probably not giving them too much information at the same time. I think it wasted a lot of learning time because they had to keep going back, and then it wasn't until kind of the third time that I realised that I had to be a bit more explicit in what I meant.
Yeah, and that's a learning curve, but equally, it was good that you hadn't just let them get away with that. You kept your expectation high, so it was good that you'd reinforced your expectation. So perhaps perhaps straight away, rather than calling over the children at that point, you might have used that effective strategy that you'd used before and had good success with, of gaining the attention of the class and then reiterating what your instructions were at that point. A little bit later on, by 11:55 I think it was, you gave out some instructions for the next task, and you did break that down into really manageable chunks of information, and you got the children to repeat these back to you, so that was really clear and effective. So you'd definitely reflected, I think, as you were teaching, from that transition earlier on. So what impact did that clap signal have on the transition into their independent activity?
Well, I think they knew what was expected of them. I think they knew they had to work in silence. I think that I'd given them those kind of logical and sequential sort of small steps of what they had to do, and checked for their understanding afterwards. But I think the clap signal just kind of gave them that opportunity. They knew that was when they go, and how they knew how to do it.
Yeah. Because they'd all waited, because your instructions were really clear, and then you'd got them to repeat them back, and you'd made it very clear. In fact, I think your first line was "when I say go," and with that clap. So they knew then that they were waiting for that clap, and then they would all go. And you also reiterated in your instructions as well that you wanted them to do all of that in silence. Yeah. So you'd already had quite a big improvement in that transition from the one that you'd experienced earlier in the lesson, which was really good to see. So thank you for that. So how might your reading of the key theme analysis that we've looked at this week, and if you think back to that idea of using consistent language, help pupils to respond to your signals?
Well, I think if you use inconsistent language, then I think they won't really know what your expectation is. Whereas if you're you're like kind of codifying those kind of approaches, like it said in the article, like using a star position or something like that, I think that it really helps them to know exactly what is expected of them and saves learning time hugely. Whereas if you're using different language all the time, then they're not, like, you might say nicely or silently. Like, nicely is quite an ambiguous word, like, or even quietly. Like, quietly, what's the distinguishment between quietly and silently? Well, silently means you don't speak at all. Quietly means you can speak a little bit. So I think that consistency of using that silently approach really demonstrates what I expect from them.
Yeah, okay, lovely, thank you. So moving forward then, and thinking about all of these aspects that we've talked about and reflected on, I think that in terms of your guided actions, I think it would be really powerful to, first of all, I will model some further strategies that we could think about in terms of using those signals to gain attention of the class. And I want you to think about what impact they have on the pupil learning.
Yeah.
And I want you to think about what role that consistency plays in obtaining successful responses from the pupils.
Yeah.
I'd like you to revisit your core training on the behaviour for learning to refresh on signalling for attention, and I'd like you, perhaps if there's anything about transitions there as well, thinking ahead, that might be useful as well for you. And I think it would be really powerful actually, and I can help you with this, but I'd like you to have a go first at perhaps scripting out a strategy so that you're using that consistent language every time you deliver that signal. And you know, then you've got it there and you can be thinking about it when you're planning across the curriculum, not just in your science lessons. So we can talk a little bit more about what scripting might look like. But I know you've already had a go at that before with the various bits that I've asked you to do. So overall, I was really impressed with the reflections that you've had, and the further reading you've done around I can definitely hear in your responses. So that's really super. So what you need to do now then is go through, and we've talked about the questions, but if you want to go and respond to those further, draw on that core training that you've had at the SCITT Centre, and think about how you might develop those answers yourself, and then you can upload that to the portal, and that'll be wonderful. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.